Now, broadcasting live from Rochester, New York. This is the Richard Dolan Show. 2 hours worldwide to bring you all the news, all the issues, the full reality behind the veil of the 24/7 propaganda, mind control, mind job that is the American national security empire. Sorting the real from the fantasy, the truth from the illusion. And now, your host, Richard Dolan on KGRAradio.com.
Here on KGRA Radio, welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings, it's July 16th, 2018. Tracy and I just came back from a recent extended excursion to Canada. We did a couple of conferences there, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver. The Toronto event is known as the ACE conference. That's the Alien Cosmic Expo. A very, very fine conference indeed, and with wonderful people there. And we just came back recently from the Vancouver event, known as Architects of the New Paradigm. Equally wonderful. In fact, the guest that I have on tonight is a gentleman that I met at that conference, and I have a feeling you're going to be very, very interested in meeting him. His name is Jonny Enoch. I cannot believe that's his actual last name, but we'll talk about that. Before I get into my conversation with Jonny, I just want to mention a couple of things going on with myself personally, professionally. I want to mention that I have a new website, richarddolanmembers.com. It includes my analysis of UFOs, geopolitics, false flags, and a lot more in the form of video, audio, blog posts. It's grown very rapidly in the last 3 months, and new content's going up multiple times every week. If you are interested in what I'm doing these days, I would suggest go visit Richard Dolan Members sometime and see what I'm up to there. Same with my YouTube channel, where I'm putting up new content on the Richard Dolan channel every week. Subscribe, get notifications. One of the things that you will see on that YouTube channel is a weekly live video that I am doing called Intelligent Disclosure. This airs every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This is the second one that I've done, and I've got Tracy on there with me for both of them, and she'll be on pretty much every one of them, I'm sure, where I will talk about on live video format things that are on my mind in the UFO field, and I think that they're popular. Certainly judging by the comments in the chat, people seem to enjoy it. So look for Intelligent Disclosure on my YouTube channel, which is also the name of my new Facebook page, Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure. Go there. If you've been following me on my old Facebook page, that's fine, but I would recommend look for Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure on Facebook, and that's where I'm really putting up new information all the time. Twitter feed, same as always, that's Rich Dolan at twitter.com. Instagram, I've got an Instagram thing. Who would have thought? It's a little more fun. Nice things up there. You may enjoy it. I don't actually even have the link for that, but it's if you just search for Richard Dolan on Instagram, you'll find me. Of course, you can continue to find me here at KGRA Radio every week doing the Richard Dolan Show. So, with that out of the way, I want to introduce my guest, Jonny Enoch. Here's the funny thing. Normally, when I have guests on my program, I know a lot about them. I've done homework on them. I've read something by them or listened to them. In the case of Jonny, I've only seen one lecture of his. I sat there at the Architects of the New Paradigm Conference. I thought it was outstanding. I would almost, was I blown away? Getting there. This guy is really good. He's young, he's very smart, deeply knowledgeable, has a broad range of knowledge as well, and he's just engaging. I mean, this is the kind of person that we want in our field, people who are interested, who are willing to ask questions, and who have done their research. I very much appreciate that. Without keeping you waiting any longer, let me bring on Jonny Enoch. Jonny, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me on, Richard. I'm very excited to be here.
Jonny, I really enjoyed meeting you, and it was all of the things that I just mentioned in my intro. You just really got it together. You did a lecture primarily on ancient aliens, ancient UFOs, and I learned things there, and I always appreciate that. And I love the fact that you mentioned Manley P Hall in your lecture. I would love to get into a little conversation about that, about him with you. But basically, I guess what I'd like to ask you first is what got you into the UFO subject and the fringe in general? I think it's always a good starting point for a conversation like this.
Well, Richard, I'd say that these experiences and, my fascination with this field started at a very early age. Growing up in my house, my sister was, reporting that she was seeing these gray extraterrestrials with the large hairless heads and the big teardrop eyes peering through her bedroom window at night. And even my mother, who's a very religious person and who is very reluctant to talk about these things, was saying that we were reporting, even at that age, that there was these little gray men coming into our bedrooms at night. And growing up, I had my own supernatural experiences. I was having these out-of-body experiences where I was floating above my bed at night and looking down at my body, or rushing up to a kaleidoscope of multicolored, multifractal colors and going to other places. But when I was asking about what was going on or looking for answers, I wasn't able to find anything because there was an information embargo growing up in this very religious environment. So as I like to joke around and say that when other boys my age were hiding Playboys under their bed, I was hiding, the esoteric books and crystals under my bed. If I wanted to see the Playboys, I had to go to their house, of course. But this fascination with the mysterious, this fascination with the unknown has never left me. And it's like, the rabbit hole gets weirder the deeper you go, and it's just an unquenchable thirst. So throughout my life, I've made it my mission to gather up various investigative tools, which is why I got into clinical hypnotherapy, to go deeper into the mind, to see what are these experiences showing us when you look at contactees or when people have these experiences. I then started to travel around the world and look for clues in our ancient mysteries and what's going on inside of our temples and on the sides of reliefs. Is it possible that we have, a breadcrumb a trail of breadcrumbs that has been there the whole time? And I very much found that to be the case.
A couple of things here. First of all, yes, I noticed in your lecture that you have done a lot of travel. There's researchers who will travel around the world, and they'll do it usually on someone else's dime, whether it's for a TV show or conferences. I don't know if that's the case with you. I get the impression you just went to all of these different places. And that's very interesting. The other thing I noticed is that, you grew up with these very bizarre experiences, you and members of your family.
Yes.
And, for people who are very skeptical of this type of situation, it's very easy for them, if they haven't had such an experience, to say, well, you have a psychological issue. You've got some kind of hypnagogic experience that you're not aware of. You've had, some other sort of thing going on in your life that they can use to explain away what you have experienced. But the thing is this, for those people who've had experiences like that, like most of them, and I know this is the case with you, like they just know that this is real. And I can just say, meeting you, anyone who meets you knows, you're sane, you're deeply thoughtful about your experience. I haven't met your family members, but I'm going to guess that they're pretty rock solid as well. And this is, in fact, the case with most people. They are psychologically quite stable, and they have these experiences that are not easily explainable, and certainly not in any conventional way. And so when you grow up with that, I guess that was the easy thing for you. Like, you didn't have to have any hurdles to overcome to ask yourself, is this real? Am I right?
Yes, well, that is the case. But I do want to point out that with my sister that had this experience, and she doesn't like me pointing this out, but I'm going to point it out, is that she's a type of person that is not typically interested in this field, and she is very much, very conservative when talking about this experience, because she lives in the world of Kardashians and Instagram feeds and looking at the subject of UFOs and the paranormal and all these sort of things. She's in her early 30s now. She doesn't want to talk about this sort of stuff to her friends, but she says she is absolutely haunted by these memories. And it's not a negative, but she very much had this experience. So I absolutely agree with you. There are people out there that, you know, when they talk about these experiences, people say, are these just hypnagogic images? Is this a sort of a disassociation from a psychological perspective? And I think that is where we have to look at these sort of experiences and, you know, pull them apart and ask ourselves, what is the overall theme? Is there a pattern here? Is there a message? And I guess it does help when you come into this field as a researcher to have, you know, some sort of preconceived notion or experience. But on the other hand, I really enjoy the type of research that's highly skeptical, that's pulling this apart, because that's where we also get a lot of gems.
I totally agree with that. In the UFO field, it's very easy and sometimes attractive for people who are involved in this and engage in this to try to dismiss statements by skeptics and even harsh debunkers. I mean, they're out there, and some of them are really snarky. But the fact is, well, it's true. But the thing is that we always have something learned from a skeptical point of view. We have to be skeptical of our own experiences as well as of the phenomenon in general. Otherwise, we fall into our own traps. I wanted to ask, in terms of your personal experiences growing up, is there a particular experience that you might be willing to share, whether from you or a family member, that is shareable in terms of encounters with other beings or sightings of something else that's unusual?
Well, I myself, I've seen sort of spiritual phenomena before, you know, what we've described as a ghost or an apparition. And what I believe that is that's a neutrino light source that's brushing up against the fabric of space-time.
Can you explain that a little bit more? That's very complex to me.
Well, we're living in a multifractal holographic universe, and it's all working on, you know, all around us. We're surrounded by different types of sacred geometry and energy and light waves, and so we're very much interacting inside of these various frequencies, as well as I believe we live in a multiverse. So it's sort of, we have all sorts of multi-dimensional intelligences around us, and I believe that's where consciousness comes into this sort of arena of looking at things, because I believe our consciousness is a non-local awareness. There's a non-locality factor to it. And when we're looking at reality, it's really just, you know, we're decoding it through these receptors in our eyes, and it's going up our visual cortices and whatnot. It's just a series of neurological and physiological discharges. And so I think that's where we underestimate, you know, the vastness of the intelligences in our universe. But as far as the experiences I've had, you know, those are one thing that, you know, at times I've questioned my own experiences, as we all do. But growing up, one of the most interesting revelations my mom came out with the last few years is, because she is your typical religious person that does not want to talk about these things. When we finally encountered her, you know, we came to her, my sister and I came to her over the last year. We said, what's going on with these experiences? You know, do you want to talk about them? She kept shutting us down, said, no, I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to talk about them. She finally relayed to us that she said that there was a period, she said, where there was an activity in the backyard growing up, and she said this was probably the late 1980s and into the early 90s. She said there was activity going on in the backyard for a few weeks' time, and she said one night I had these images come to me of what was like a ship and these beings. I saw them, and she said that this kind of went away, and it kind of sounded like she had been on the ship, but she said it happened while she was laying in bed, and that's all she wanted to talk about. And she very much does not want to talk about these experiences. So that sort of thing, it goes on. It's quite common. The people I've talked to, I've done work with people doing clinical hypnotherapy, you know, trying to regress them and find out about missing time. And I've learned some very interesting things from them, interviewing them. And these sort of experiences are more common than we would believe in our experiencers. So I've just always thought it was very fascinating.
I'm making a note about the clinical hypnotherapy because I would like to come back to that and ask you what it's like for you to be doing that, actually. A couple of things come to mind when you talk about this. Again, it's interesting that you have this with multiple members in your family and who are willing to talk about it. And it's also interesting, I think, just sociologically how people react to these things differently, like even within one's family. Some people like to talk about it or want to talk about it. Others do not. Sounds like your sister will talk about it with you, but not with many other people.
That's right.
And your mother is also very, very private about this. And it's an interesting thing about whether it's UFOs or spiritual encounters or whatever it is, these affect people very deeply, personally. And I've always considered it unfortunate that we are in a society, a civilization, where many people feel unable to talk about these types of experiences, because I'm sure you agree, like we're bumping up against something that's really important. The only other thing I would just want to ask you is this theory you made me think of when you're describing holographic universe and frequencies. And these are ideas that I've encountered, and I think many listeners have encountered for a long time, and I'm actually quite open to this. My only stumbling block, I guess, would be, or my hesitation would be, I don't know how to test such a theory, and I really believe in applying as much rational inquiry and scientific method as I can to any of these beliefs. Having said that, I think it's a viable hypothesis that we're living in a kind of multiverse. And so would your theory of this be something like we have perceptual abilities, and these perceptions are geared primarily for, for this, I don't even know how to describe this reality that we find ourselves in, but every once in a while, due to conditions that I cannot even explain what they are, we're able to perceive the next layer of reality or the next dimension? Like, how would you perceive this or describe this?
I would absolutely say that we are surrounded by what I would describe as a multi-dimensional sort of reality, if you want to look at how our universe works. I also think it's fascinating, the hypotheses that we live in a multiverse, because I mean we've had various scientific models to describe that how we would live in a multiverse, and one of those that comes to mind is when we look at the Wilkinson's microwave anisotropy probe, or the WMAP scan, where they've looked at the radioactive background scan of our universe. And not only did they say, hey, your universe is in the shape of a dodecahedron, which actually Plato described in the Timaeus as the cosmos is in that shape.
Really?
There are these circuitous patterns in the background of the universe, where if we look at the idea of the Big Bang, that there's been multiple Big Bangs, and these are sort of the leftover ricochets of it, and that scientists are saying that we are just a little bubble in a vast ocean full of universes. So is this like this idea, this cosmic realization that we're literally surrounded by universes and different realities? It's just an infinite multiverse, and moreover an infinite universe that we live in, just beaming full of life, and different realities existing at different frequencies. This idea that we live in a holographic universe is very interesting. A lot of people talk about the simulation theory, and they'll equate it to Plato's cave analogy. And they'll say, that basically they'll try to say, we're basically living in a computer-based sort of reality. I don't think it's too far off from that. I think that our visitors, for example, that we're encountering, I think that they're just like us. Then they're all of the above, perhaps even more evolved. Is it our destiny, perhaps, to be more evolved and to have higher faculties of perception? You most certainly in your work, your work is most certainly some of my favorite work there is out there. And I love your objective way of looking at things and pulling them apart and using logic and reasoning and really bringing them down to earth, which I think is incredible. But in your work, you most certainly encountered cases of beings that had, metamorphic and telepathic capabilities and other evolved abilities, right? Oh,
absolutely. The thing about this field of study is, yes, I will always want to bring in as much reason, objectivity as I'm able to. But that doesn't mean that I come in as a skeptic. That means I come in as an investigator. And you have to go where the information leads you, where the data leads you. And there's just a lot of strange things going on in this field, and it's impossible for me to dismiss them. I want to ask you, we've got about 5 minutes before we reach our first break. First of all, you're going to make me read Plato's Timaeus. I haven't read that in like 30 plus years. I want to read that statement. I'm sure it's in there, and I want to find it. But you're making me wonder. So in terms of this phenomenon, let's talk about UFOs for a few minutes here. We think, are they extraterrestrial? Are they from another dimension of reality, interdimensional? It sounds like you think is it a little bit of both? What do you think if we're encountering a UFO intelligence, an intelligence behind this phenomenon? What do you think this is? Are these beings from another planet in our dimension of reality that have come here elsewhere, or are they filtering through the veil somehow from another dimension?
Can I take us back in time for a moment?
Sure.
Let's go back in time. The year is 1963. The great Sergeant Major Bob Dean, who I know you're very familiar with, and you know him personally.
Yes.
Sergeant Major Bob Dean was stationed at SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, for NATO. And his entire life was changed before his entire life was changed before his eyes, when he discovered a top secret cosmic clearance document, military intelligence, that this is as high up secrecy as you get, that it says in there that we've been visited for thousands of years, that the beings that are coming here are peaceful. If they wanted to take us over, they could have taken us over a long time ago. But even military intelligence knew back then, they said that these beings were interplanetary, intergalactic, interstellar, and even multidimensional. And I think the answer is pretty clear that many of them are going to be evolved at different stages depending on where they're coming from, how far along they are as a people. I mean, look on our planet. Look how far ahead we would be if we weren't wiped out and earlier civilizations were destroyed by great cataclysms, which we know have happened on this planet, just going out of the Pleistocene period into the Holocene after the mini ice age. Can you think if we had continuous development and where we are going, even naturally, or even what transhumanists are trying to do, the type of technology and evolution that we have right now? So I think it's all of the above. And our destiny is in the stars.
Okay, fair enough. I would say, I know Bob Dean quite well, and I adore him. I've known Bob for, I think, 18 years now, and what you said, like his discovery when he was at SHAPE, I think is probably his single most important statement. He said a lot of things that are interesting to me, but that's very key. Even so, I don't disagree necessarily with it, but I would hesitate to take any statement, even a top secret military document or the claim of that there was a top secret military document, as an ultimate authority. I don't, until I personally can see how they do their calculations or do their investigation. To me, it's just another hypothesis. And I always take military intelligence as they're interesting. They're particularly interesting because tax dollars pay for them, and they are responsible government agencies, at least in theory. So when they have an interest in this phenomenon, I think it's important. But that doesn't mean that their word is gospel either. And I'm sure you agree with this, just my take is every theory has to be put to the test, and that includes classified military conclusions. So
that's true.
But it is interesting. I wondered, because I've heard this elsewhere, claims anyway, that military analyses have stated this phenomenon has been here for thousands of years. Linda Moulton Howe has had her own contact who said the same thing to her. And my immediate answer is always to ask, how do they know? How do they know that other beings have been here for thousands of years? And I don't have an answer to that. But it is intriguing, and if it's true, then certainly we want to know why they know what they do. That's the key, and hopefully one day we will get some answers as far as that goes. We've got about a minute or so to the break. I'm sorry, you were going to say something, Johnny.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when we look at the idea of an expansion theory, that everything was not at a singularity at the rollout of the universe, or everything would be as bright as the surface of the sun, but it's not. We have dark matter, that things are constantly growing and expanding and evolving. We have reason to believe that other life could have developed further out in the universe. There could have been other mutations. There could have been other life forms and intelligences that, could be vastly more evolved and sophisticated than us. And who knows what the future of our evolution looks like. So that's why I think that we have different categories that we could potentially fit these into, like the Kardashev scale gives us.
This is why I really enjoy talking with you, because you've got the historical knowledge of this, but there's a lot of philosophy there. I really want to explore this with you for the remainder of this program. We're right now at the bottom of the hour. I'm Richard Dolan here with Jonny Enoch. And Jonny, where's your website? Where can people find you, incidentally?
Thanks for asking, Richard. It's at metaphysicalsource.com, and we're putting up a new website right now. But thanks for asking.
Metaphysicalsource.com. Absolutely fascinating. We're going to be back after a very short break. I'm Richard Dolan here with Jonny Enoch on KGR.
Hi, honey, I'm home.
You're late, mister.
I know. I totally lost track of time watching UFO TV at Bob's. Bob went to Amazon Prime, typed in one word, 5 letters, UFO TV, and then bam, this huge selection of movies popped up. UFOs, Forbidden Archaeology, Suppressed Science, Nikola Tesla, David Icke, and they add new films every week.
I guess that means we're getting UFO TV.
UFO TV is now streaming on Amazon Prime. Look for new films every week. Limited releases also on iTunes.
This is Richard Dolan announcing a new exclusive content website, richarddolanmembers.com. I've been working on this for a long time. Unique weekly podcasts that you won't hear anywhere else, fresh articles and blog posts, a special video series entitled Off the Cuff with Richard Dolan, regular Ask Me Anything style live chat sessions, and more. This is a full-featured member site where you will get my insights, my updates, and be able to interact directly with me. To learn more, go to richarddolanmembers.com.
Now streaming on Amazon Prime, UFO TV presents I Know What I Saw, Expanded Director's Cut. Steven Spielberg says, compelling. Larry King says, this is the real Close Encounters. Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell said, I Know What I Saw is the most compelling film on the subject of UFOs to date. I Know What I Saw, Expanded Director's Cut. Now streaming on Amazon Prime. Also available on iTunes and DVD from UFO TV.
For the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRAradio.com.
We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with Jonny Enoch. I really enjoyed that last segment of the conversation. Jonny, welcome back.
Well, it's good to be back.
So, you are Canadian, and I'm saying this because we didn't get into it before. I don't think listeners, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I want to do in this program and in many follow-up programs is explore elements of UFO research from around the world. So what I would like to do is interview individuals from, whether it's Canada or South America or Europe or Africa or Russia or China, Australia, and so forth. And because, look, we're in the 21st century here. It is high time that researchers from around the world are actively listening to what each other are finding. And the fact is that there's still a tremendous amount of provincialism, it seems to me, in the UFO field among North Americans. They'll be aware of a few things that happen in the UK, and it seems to me that's about it. So I want to expand that. There are other people in this field trying to do that, and I want to do that as well. So I'm glad to be talking with you, not only for who you are, but for the fact that you're from another country outside the United States. And as a Canadian, you're living in British Columbia, I believe.
Yes.
You're in BC, which we were just visiting, and it's amazing. I love British Columbia. What a beautiful part of the world, first of all. I mean, it's just endless, limitless forest, it seems to me. Just amazing. But I guess I would ask you, as Canada, first of all, was in the news recently in terms of UFOs. There was a study, Chris Rutkowski out of the University of Manitoba has been doing UFO data for decades, and he just put out another report, and Canada has had over 1,000 reported UFO sightings. I mean, these are mostly raw reports, but that still is more than 3 per day. I'm wondering if you have a bit of a handle on the Canadian UFO phenomenon from your own perspective. You grew up with something like that, but do you follow what's going on in Canada in terms of the UFO subject?
Yes, I do follow what's going on with the UFOs here and abroad. But probably some of the most profound realizations I've got about this came from the former Canadian Defense Minister of Canada, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who I know you are very well acquainted with, and
yes,
you traveled across Canada with. Mm-hmm. And he will most certainly tell you that this subject is very real, and he's well aware of not only the involvement of extraterrestrials on government bases in the U.S. from his colleagues and also ETs here, but I would point to probably one of our greatest ufologists here in Canada would be probably Grant Cameron, talking about this information, who was also at the conference with us. There's good reason to believe why people in Manitoba would want to be very interested in UFOs. There's the famous Falcon Lake incident, which was very, very well documented, and was Stefan Michalek, I believe his name was.
That's right.
The fellow that had the incident where they described this craft, and it was very, very well documented. And of course, there's RCMP reports, Royal Canadian Mounted Police reports that go along with this. Of course, we've heard about Shag Harbor, and both of these incidents, the Shag Harbor one that happened in Nova Scotia, which people, I believe it was triangular craft, and it was later spotted above the water, and all sorts of mysterious reports that came in about this. Both these incidents happened in 1967, but in British Columbia itself, there's been other people who have made all sorts of very fascinating reports of seeing UFOs and encountering ETs. And one of them that comes to mind is Miriam Delicato. She was in northern British Columbia, and her report was that I believe she was leaving 100 Mile House, Prince George area, heading towards the lower mainland where you guys were just visiting here. Mm-hmm. And she had encountered these luminescent balls of light, or these these lights in the sky behind her car, and then they stopped, and there was these beings that got out, some smaller in depiction, but then there was these larger Nordique looking beings that she described in her incident, and she's been talking about this for years, and that goes back to even 1988. Now, I've talked to all sorts of UFO investigators that we have here that spend their full time photographing UFOs. One of them here, his name is John Kelly, and for many years he's been capturing photographs and presenting on all the UFO phenomena that we have here, because there seems to be a lot of UFO activity in places where that's really open and wide range, where we don't have a lot of light pollution. Perhaps that there's an attraction to these areas. Who knows if they're setting up bases there or doing some sort of experimentation. It's kind of hard hard to, it's kind of, we got to put our minds together and say, why are they going there and hypothesize? But I've heard some very, very fascinating clues from people about why they come here and what they're doing here. And some of the best information I've gotten, the most interesting story, are from our Indigenous people, our First Nations people here, and the elders.
I would love to hear about that. I just want to mention the Michalak case from 1967.
Yes.
It's, when I researched this years ago when I was writing my very first UFO book, UFOs in the National Security State. And my goodness, this is an amazing case. So this is a situation of a man, he's out in a forested area, Falcon Lake, right? And he sees a landed craft. And at first he's assuming that it's some kind of American contraption, some advanced American craft. And he's cautiously approaching it. He says, anyone in there? And he actually, as I recall, he peers his head inside the craft briefly, and he moves away, and somehow there's an exhaust from the craft that strikes him on the chest. And I don't think, it didn't seem like they were intentionally trying to harm him, but it definitely harmed him. And he ended up with this. He was hospitalized. He lost a tremendous amount of weight. He was very ill for a while. And there was this mark on his chest, a very well-known photograph of him. And I'm trying to remember the details of that story. I think the craft just took off and left. But that was the Michalak case. And I don't think anyone's ever really been able to explain that one in any conventional terms.
It's a fascinating case. And, even our Canadian government, our mint, commemorated, recently a UFO coin that came out in, these things are actually taken so seriously here. Now that people are starting to look at this and say, okay, maybe we do have a really great UFO heritage that we can be proud of. I like what his son said. His son put out a book about this incident. He said if his dad had hoaxed this, remember, we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed it, then he was a freaking genius. So, you got to look at stuff like that. What did he have to gain from hoaxing this? I think that this was it's a remarkable case.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Would you talk about some of the cases that you received from Native elders in the area? I'm very curious about that.
Absolutely. So one of them I talked about during my presentation. I went out to meet with the Métis elder here, and his name is Derek White Sky Cloud, and he's been very much involved in different Indigenous affairs, all of these particular areas. He's very involved in environmentalism, very involved in the spiritual areas and looking at extraterrestrials. He himself has been a contactee, but he also made me aware that in their traditions that they have, these abilities and sacred dances to contact the star people from the Star Lodge. And the keeper of the sacred dances here is actually Tom McCallum, who I've also talked to, I've sat down with. It's very interesting because this reminds me of Dr. Stephen Greer's CSETI protocols, where we're looking at what I like to call, Richard, an ancient consciousness technology. I believe that's existed for a very long time. That we as humans, we have these sort of bioelectrical magnetic fields around us. We have sort of a consciousness-based way. Again, going back into our earlier conversation of interfacing, perhaps with more advanced beings and whatnot. And what they do in their tradition is it's very interesting. If I recall what he was telling me, he said that they gather these copper pennies or some sort of copper to put on your person to act as an energy conductor. And then, you prepare for the whole day through a form of fasting and praying. And, they'll gather cedar and they'll go out to a place in the woods. And the people that I've talked to that have attended with these sessions, they most certainly see the star beings come into the circle and come down, and they do interface with them. And they say their people have had contact with the star beings for a very long time, and had a knowledge of the stars and these stories working with these beings. And these traditions, very interestingly enough, seem to go further north, more north when we head that way. We have those sort of First Nations traditions. It's absolutely remarkable what the oral traditions tell us when we talk to various people in this area. But I've also been told, not only by Derek and others, that in the area where we would call Desroches or near Mission, BC, that there, according to some of these stories, that there are large underground extraterrestrial installations. And this is something I've heard many times before about, ETs being here at times, that they, most certainly in the Dulce case, we've heard stories about that. But, ETs coming here and then having some sort of bases on the Earth as like an outpost.
So you're talking about the north part of British Columbia, like north of Vancouver.
That's correct, too, which is very interesting because, again, that goes back even into, we hear about Miriam Delicato's experience.
Right.
So British Columbia has had a lot of stories to do with UFOs and extraterrestrials.
People need to understand British Columbia is very large. And, once you get out of the Vancouver region, there's not a lot of people up there.
You can't live there during the winter.
Yeah, it's It's cold. I mean, it's getting up, toward the elevation of Alaska. And it gets cold and remote.
That's right.
So now, did the elders give you an idea of what these beings looked like? I mean, they actually had these beings visit them in their circle. Did they give any particular description of these beings?
Well, during these contact experiences that they've had, and I most certainly investigated these sort of what I call protocols in all sorts of different settings. I think they're very, very fascinating. Even if you look at what Aleister Crowley was doing, and I don't mean to throw Crowley into the mix here, but he was having his different contact experiences using sort of these consciousness-based protocols, and he had an experience with a being named Lam, L-A-M. If you look it up, very much looks like a gray extraterrestrial. So I believe that those are more energetic forms, almost like a carbon copy form, that come and walk amongst them and communicate to them, and they have a long tradition of this. But then we go to more of a physical interaction. Derek's had a description for me, Derek White Sky Cloud, of the encounter he had in 2002, where a being named Zael had brought him up onto a ship, and his experience is absolutely fascinating, the detail he goes into. He says he was brought up into a ship, and he met with a being named Zael, who was about an 8-foot Caucasian-looking gentleman with light hair, light-looking beard, blondish beard, and a very light type of light eyes, and told him about the history of our solar system, admonished him about our planet, and we've heard this over and over again about the messages that the ETs have for us about that we need to be better caretakers of our planet, to look at our environment, to clean up our affairs, but most certainly gave him that message, a message of hope, and also took him up through, very particularly, Derek said, they took him up through Orion's belt. They were trying to show him that there's some sort of coming and going sort of portal there, according to what he had experienced. But this ties in most certainly into these particular traditions and what he's doing. So their people over with the Métis have had a very long relationship with extraterrestrials, and they have contact protocols for this. And I think it's absolutely fascinating that we also find a connection with the Native Americans. You look over at the Zuni and the Hopi and what's on their petroglyphs and through oral traditions. I mean, these traditions go back a long way all over the world.
So I guess I'm just going to ask you, you find this individual credible? I mean, you must, because you're telling the story here. So he comes across to you as a credible individual.
He did. His story is so vivid and full of detail. It's remarkable, what he goes into, and the amount of dedication that he has to his work and that they have to their work. These elders, they'll spend considerable amounts of time praying and fasting and working with the ETs. And believe it or not, Richard, I've seen the manuals. I've actually seen the manuals for these protocols, and these are big, thick manuals they have about these sacred dances and songs that must be used, and these writings that have been preserved that Tom McCallum has. He's the sacred keeper of these, and this is very, very sacred to them to work with the star people and the Star Lodge. It's not a very serious thing to them.
It's just fascinating.
It is.
I mean, when I encounter stories like this from individuals, I don't know what to do with them sometimes. Like I will listen. I will occasionally repeat them. If I find the person believable, I'll kind of make a little note of it. But again, I just don't know how to work with such information. Maybe this is my own limitation, right? I'm just waiting for proof. And how am I going to get proof of something like this? Orion's Belt, my goodness. I don't even know how far that is. That's got to be very far away. But presumably they've got
it's sort of like this, though. In the Bible, and I quote all sorts of different religious texts because I'm a student of comparative religion, so I'm not exclusive to one area. In the Bible, it says, "By their fruits you shall know them." So, the way I look at it is that can we find replicable data? Can we find things that we can see that have merit in other areas? Is there a pattern here? Is there a self-serving agenda? Where does the information lead us? And we also can look at, let's say, what you and I were talking about, how we can kind of form a Maslow's hierarchy of needs based on experience. Where does this information fit into that hierarchy, and how do we apply it? So again, when we become objective and keep an open mind, we just got to look at all the facts and just lay them down on the table and see if we can piece it all together.
I wonder if you are aware of there was a wave of UFO sightings in somewhat of the north of British Columbia, in a little town called Houston, British Columbia.
Well, I'm aware of Houston.
Okay, so... Well, back in 2001, 2002, 2003, so we're going back a bit, like 15 plus years, this little town, they have a population of about 4,000 people. And it's about, I think, 700 miles north or so of Vancouver. So it's out there. It's way out there. So there was a Canadian researcher back then named Brian Vike. And I used to follow him. He put out a kind of a weekly UFO report. And he reported week after week, month after month, this wave of incredible UFO sightings that was going on in this little town, Houston, British Columbia. And back then, it really got my attention. I have all of the reports that he noted. And, until talking with you, I hadn't really thought much about it in terms of, First Nation, Native individuals, Native tribes having something to do with this. But now I really wonder. So what was being recorded back in the early 2000s would, as far as I recall, people just reporting unusual craft while driving on the highway late at night, or craft that were landing. There were a number of calls to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. So this was something that was going on, and we're talking quite a large number of sightings for this relatively small, fairly remote town. So it might be something to look into. In fact, after we're done, I'll share some of these reports with you. I've got them here on my computer. But it's just fascinating, and I've often wondered, what is it about this little place in the middle, relatively speaking, middle of nowhere, up in Canada, seeing UFOs, and I've just never been able to make heads or tails out of it.
I've heard that over and over again, and again, this is just speculative. I have no proof to go by with this, but that's another area. And I have heard of Vike, and I've heard of some of these massive sightings. But I have heard, again, another rumors and talk about people saying that there is underground UFO bases. Yeah. And this is interesting because we hear that our own governments have underground bases, and one of the things that I realized with this is one of the road trips I was on with my friend Jordan Maxwell. We were going out to various areas by Las Vegas and California, and when you go over to the area by Area 51 in Rachel, Nevada there, and you go out by the Little Alien Inn, which I'm sure you've been to many times, being one of the most iconic and most important historians in ufology history, period, who you are, when you go to the Little Alien Inn, Jordan would say to me, just walk across the street. And when you walk across the street, you put your ear up to the telephone pole and you hear movement underground. Like it's almost like trailers or trains or something moving underground. It's like a cargo moving about. And there's no doubt when we go there to Los Alamos and all these places that we have this connection. Well, Jordan would tell me through his own extraterrestrial encounters that there was areas way out in the middle of the desert that he discovered in 1959 through his own contacting experience, that they said there was these underground bases for over by Palmdale in California. So, I think that these remote, very far out places seem to be, ideal for UFOs that are visiting here. Maybe they want to kind of set up a laboratory or an experimentation thing underground. That's what I kind of imagine anyhow.
You got me thinking about this. I believe that there is a labyrinthian underground network, certainly out in the Western U.S., and actually, why not in Western Canada? It would make perfect sense to me. Jordan Maxwell has his stories of this, and I've known Jordan. Have you contacted him lately? I haven't spoken to Jordan Maxwell in a few years. I'm hoping
I talk to him almost daily. We were talking last night.
Really?
Actually, the thing is, when Jordan calls me, I know it's usually going to be about a 4 or 5 hour call. So I answered the phone at about 10, and I didn't get to bed till about 2 or 3 a.m. We had a great time.
Oh my God,
yeah,
that's so great. That's so great. That's so great.
But one thing he told me, by the way, I just want to throw this in. I don't know if you've ever heard this. He told me something very interesting on one of our trips up by Area 51. Mm-hmm. He said to me that, have you ever wondered why they call it Area 51? And I said, yeah, I've always wondered, why did they call it Area 51? He said, there's no Area 52. There's no Area 50. And he apparently, who's to know if this person actually was from S4, that they were one of the alleged guards or people that worked there was at the Little Alien Inn one day having some pie and coffee. And this guy was talking. He said, well, have you ever thought of this, why they call it Area 51? Well, think about when you say Mayday. Mayday is 0501. And this is the distress signal. But also, Jordan said a fun fact is that look at the birthday of the Bavarian Illuminati that was founded by Adam Weishaupt on May 1st, 1776. And not to say that the Area 51 has anything to do with the Bavarian Illuminati.
5-1.
Connection to, that Mayday distress signal.
Yes, Adam Weishaupt. He created the Illuminati back in the 18th century. He was May 1st?
Yeah, that was May 1st, 1776 when it was founded.
Oh, when it was founded. Mayday. How interesting. I'd never known that. I'd never heard of it.
Yes.
Very interesting. We're again getting toward the top of the hour, but I'm thinking of stories of underground bases and an ET presence that I have heard many, many times in California and in the areas you're talking about, basically the Eastern California desert areas going into Nevada. Stories are rife with this type of underground connection. I really remember the work of Bill Hamilton. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all. He's out in California, and he did a great amount of study back in the 80s and 90s on this matter, and I have a lot of his work. So I'm very interested and intrigued by the stories of Canadian underground extraterrestrial bases. And, I'm at the point now in looking at this phenomenon where I think it's entirely possible. And one thing that might be interesting is if in your own research you're able to collect as many of these as you can and put them out there. I would really be interested in, and I think other people would be interested in getting detailed follow-up on some of this, which leads me to a segue for the next segment. You are writing a book. Are you not? You are writing a book. And I would like to ask about that. Maybe we can get into that in the next segment of this program. But what is the book about?
It's about the cosmic origins of civilization, or the cosmic secrets out there. I believe that when we look at all of our ancient religions, religion should be treated like a science, Richard. That's what I think, and that we've lost touch with the ancient language of symbolism, as I was referring to at the presentation when I brought up Manley P Hall, which we can also get into on the next segment. Mm-hmm. But when I look at this is that there is an incredible story that unfolds in our ancient histories that's not even so much speculative, but it's so beautiful. And it leads us to an ancient consciousness technology, which I believe our ancient religions, which have been seeded here, have been to the unfolding of civilization. And there's a cosmic seed in all of it. And there's a lot of questions that we could start asking, like how in 2nd century Rome did Kronos have, chains or rings around him? There's amazing answers to that on how they had that knowledge, even before Galileo went to his observatory in Civitavecchia in 1610. So there's all sorts of incredible questions that we can start asking that lead us to profound answers.
Kronos being Saturn, I assume, is what you mean.
Yes.
So Kronos having rings around him. I get it. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll want to talk about that. Yeah, we're at the top of the hour now, so why don't we take a quick break, Johnny, and we will come back. I am Richard Dolan here on KGRA Radio, here with my guest for the evening, the fabulous Jonny Enoch. We'll come back.
Hi folks, Ray Sobbs here, stopping by to say thank you to all of our loyal listeners for all of your amazing support to all of us here at the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. As most of you know, and some of you may not, many changes are in effect during this time at the KGRA DB. The most significant being the move of the KGRA headquarters to Salt Lake City, Utah. We are in the middle of building new studios, installing state-of-the-art digital broadcasting hardware and software, and much more. During this period, you may notice some station downtimes or replay interruptions for brief equipment testing, but these issues will never take place during live programming. If at any time any of you have any questions regarding this announcement or any other inquiries, feel free to email me directly at racehobbs@kgraradio.com. We know you're going to be really proud of the upgrades being made as we continue to grow bigger and better. To be your contact for UFO paranormal talk radio across the planet, we are your KGRAradio.com.
This is Richard Dolan, and I want to brag for just a second about the incredible authors I publish under Richard Dolan Press. Some of the most innovative and well-researched books in the field of UFOs and beyond that you'll find anywhere in the world. Incredible UFO encounters, the cover-up, the experiences by ordinary people, Russian UFOs, psychic phenomena, consciousness, synchronicities, and owls. Yeah, it's all there, and it's all fascinating reading because I would never publish a book that isn't. To learn more, go to richarddolanpress.com.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese!
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
We are the contact for alternative research topics. The Planet, KGRAradio.com.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The fact is, from the beginning of this, we have recognized that this is a tough business. It is difficult. that it is dangerous.
President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air.
Let's see, where should we start? The Gulf of Tonkin incident?
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Now that took us into war in Vietnam. They've now admitted it was a lie.
What does that have to do with 9/11?
That shows that we will lie to go to war.
Just a few moments ago, something believed to be a plane crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center.
We should take nothing for granted.
9/11 was an inside job.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We will interrupt all programs to give you latest news bulletins. Stay tuned to this station.
You're locked in to The Richard Dolan Show right here on KGRAradio.com. To find the latest on Richard, visit his website at richarddolanpress.com. And now, back to the program.
We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with Jonny Enoch. Johnny, so you, I was giving you a hard time about your name. It just seems Enoch is probably not your actual last name. And it occurred to me that might have been a bit impertinent of me to ask about that.
No, that's okay. You know, it is my name. And here's the thing. There's no relation to the Enoch in the apocryphal text. Believe me, I've tried to call up the Ecumenical Council and the Council of Nicaea for my royalties, but they haven't been answering the phone since 325 CE. I like to take the Jim Carrey approach that I'm just a field of star tetrahedrons.
So Enoch is your name.
Yes,
and
sir.
So that's it. All right, good. I didn't realize that. It's a very interesting and unusual and kind of a cool last name, I've got to say. And it's really like right on for this field of study of yours, because you're not just doing UFOs. You're doing UFOs and ancient civilization, ancient religion, ancient comparative religion. So actually, you fell into the right name. Well done.
Well, thank you very much. It's very fitting.
So you're writing a book. What's the name of this book?
It's basically, the working title right now is The Cosmic Origins of Civilization. And the idea behind the book is that when I look at our ancient religions and how they've been seeded, I see that they are a science. I believe that we're looking at an ancient consciousness technology, that we have this lost ancient language of symbolism. And I've seen this sort of seed of civilization that's been growing, and there's been a pattern there the entire time, that just like that quote I was sharing at the conference from Manley P Hall, that once we learn to read the language of symbolism, that a great veil will fall from the eyes of men. That's what I really believe that we're looking at here, and that there's an unfolding story about who we are. And once we discover who we are, it's so beautiful and so amazing where we're headed. Most certainly our destiny is amongst the stars.
So what are your thoughts about how this symbolism has come to us? Like, what is the source of the origin? You mentioned the cosmic origins. So is it coming from another civilization, extraterrestrial, or some other dimension, other intelligences bringing this knowledge to us in forms of symbolism?
Well, symbolism means a lot of different things to different people. There's layers within symbolism. For example, when you look at the great Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great, who stormed into Egypt and all these incredible places, that when he had a very particular way of encountering these civilizations and preserving much of their culture and their people and whatnot. But when he came to Egypt, of course, He was honored, and alongside Ptolemy, and a lot of the most magnificent secrets were given up to them by the priests, and we see that preserved in Hathor's temple in Dendara, one of my favorite temples in Egypt. We see these gorgeous Greco-Roman temples that have all the ancient secrets there and depictions, but it's very much assumed that the Greeks were not given all of the secrets about even the meanings of the hieroglyphics. When you're reading hieroglyphics, Richard, depending on the way that the hieroglyphic is facing, let's say you have a serpent facing to the left, you're going to read the hieroglyphics to the left. If you have this beast or something that's facing downwards, you're going to read it down. It's multi-directional, which is very interesting. So outside of the Rosetta Stone, we have a shorthand version of it. We have a common version of reading the hieroglyphics, but there was also a secret meaning to them. And this is very much as we see in our symbolism. There's one meaning that is for the profane, and then there is one meaning that is so beautiful and timeless for the mysteries. And so I believe symbolism works on our subconscious. I believe there's an ancient connection we have to it. It's not evil. I think there's a lot of people in the conspiracy genre out there that spend a lot of time trying to find this pernicious agenda, this incredible, horrible machination by a hidden hand, which, don't get me wrong, you and I both know that there's a great amount of manipulation out there, and we're subliminally being divided, and there's a certain amount of control that goes on as well. But when you see the goddess on the side of the Starbucks cup, who is Isis, she is Pisces, right? You resonate with that. But it's not necessarily an evil thing. It's not a bad thing. So the symbolism, when we learn to read it, for example, will open us up into questioning more, into seeing a pattern to our civilization.
Well, let me ask you about Manley P Hall, since this seems like a good opportunity. I read at least large segments of Manley P Hall's book. I can't pretend that I read the whole thing, but I consider it a kind of a work of genius, to be honest with you. This was a guy who, about 100 years ago, in his late 20s, in the 1920s, writes this incredibly fat book that really gets into the hidden traditions of ancient religions, including early Christianity, Judaism, and the Eleusinian mystery traditions, and so much more. And he did it in a way that I just thought was incredibly brilliant. It's really a monumental effort. One of the things that I took away from that book is that, he made, just as you've made, this distinction between the version of a religion for the great many people, and then the esoteric meaning behind all of these religions for the very few initiates. Now, in Hall's theory or idea, all of these esoteric traditions really seem to be concerned primarily with salvation of the soul. That is, how to achieve a true immortality of the soul. And the impression that I got is that these ancient traditions did not assume that every human soul was by its nature immortal, that it was something that had to be worked for, that you had to sort of cleanse yourself and purge yourself and become worthy or become able to achieve that status. That was the impression that I got. How do you look at things in a similar way, or do you have a different interpretation? Or am I getting Manley P Hall wrong altogether? I'd like to know what you think about that.
Well, Manley P Hall's work was so profoundly important. His work is so incredible. He's a magnificent genius. He was, as you know, he's also a Canadian.
Yes.
Born 1901 in Canada in Petersburg, Ontario, and with him, he was raised by his grandmother, went out to find his mother again in Santa Monica, California. And he just from a very early age, he had this incredible, photographic memory, and information came to him. He wrote, they say, I've heard one number from some of the people at PRS when I go visit his center there in Los Feliz. I've heard that the number of books he wrote is somewhere around 200. I've only been able to acquire about 150 of them. Some of them I have personally autographed by him in my library, but he gave over something like 8,000 lectures wrote countless articles. He was continually writing and giving these massive lectures to everybody. And towards the end of his life, most of his stuff was focused on helping people and psychology and self-help. I mean, his works in his library that he collected around the world in his various travels were considered a national treasure. Various U.S. presidents had, visited his library and kept his works on their shelf. So I would most certainly agree with you. I mean, the ideas and the secret teachings of all ages, what they teach, what he looked at, and looking at the deeper sides of the mysteries. But again, Hall was very, very clear in his work when you read it, that there was a sort of a hidden hand, that there were caretakers of humanity working behind the scenes that were very much aware of, the importance of us as the human family and our development, that we were kind of going through a kindergarten, and they had left our religions and seeded them with a pattern, going back into the ancient Aryan world with the Hindu mysteries. And Hall very much believed that there was a movement down into northern India, just like Max Muller said, which he was a big fan of, that the great Orientalist and philologist, he said they came down into northern India and then spread into, after mixing with the Dravidian people, which became India, spread down into Asia Minor and down into northern Africa, into Egypt. And there was this spread of civilization around the world, and that it was not an accident. Even America, he always taught, was not an accident, that it was planned out thousands of years prior, all its ancient symbolism, and everything had been there all along. So I think this is a beautiful realization, and I just love people like Manley P Hall.
Oh, he's amazing. Absolutely brilliant person to read. So let me ask you, how would America have been planned thousands of years before? I mean, I wonder about this. Does this make any sense to you? How could it be?
Well, there's the likes of the great Sir Francis Bacon, who we know wrote the New Atlantis. And Sir Francis Bacon, we believe, was born, he was the bastard son of Queen Elizabeth. When you go back to Elizabeth I and you look at him, he was born Sir Francis Tudor, and it's believed that he was also the true identity of William Shakespeare. And that's what Hall actually taught as well, and believed that when you look at Shakespeare's work, it was preparing the people for the new the new generations that would come up, and culturally and sophistication wise and art wise, preparing them for the type of mentality and thinking that there was a great vision envisioned back even into ancient Egypt. And many will link this back into the Rosicrucian traditions, linked to not only Bacon himself, but into John Dee, who came before him. Mm-hmm. And they believe that King Thutmose III was the Grand Master of the Rosicrucian order. So there's these traditions that are passed down that were seeded by the Lords of Dawn, as he taught, that this was a greatly envisioned plan, and that, I don't know, you could say that civilization after civilization that rose was part of a great blueprint.
My goodness. Well, I think when you, I assume a lot of this is going to be in your book. So my only request is that you footnote this to the max, because when I read it, I'm going to want to know, like, where did this come from and where did that come from? You'll be giving, I think, readers a lot of opportunity to investigate. But, I mean, honestly, this is the kind of stuff that's just absolutely fascinating. I have believed for ages that there is this massive holes, plural, in our ancient history. There's just so much that has been lost to us. And, you know, I think of the destruction of all the great ancient libraries. I mean, starting with Alexandria, of course, which was maybe the greatest of the tragedies. The Library of Alexandria had, as far as we know, pretty much anything that was worth retaining in the ancient world. It was this massive. And, you know, there's no internet, no Gutenberg printing press. These were carefully, painstakingly constructed documents on animal skin and papyrus and whatever else could be done. And Alexandria had them all, and it was all destroyed in the late 4th, early 5th century AD. And then you have the destruction of other great libraries during the Fourth Crusade in the early 12th century. The Venetians came in and just torched or destroyed much of Constantinople. And just they weren't even a Muslim city; they were just Byzantine. Go get them! And they robbed that place blind. And there were so many other examples of just loss of ancient knowledge, and it's just heartbreaking because what do we have now? But there's scholars and researchers like yourself who are trying to piece this back together again. And I just find it's fascinating and valuable. And anything we can learn about this, our ancient past, which has been taken from us through human criminality, is all to the good. And I hope that you get this book done. What else? So what else can you say then about our ancient origins or our ancient belief systems, this ancient blueprint that's been left to us? Who's doing the leaving? Who left this to us?
Well, that's a fascinating question, and if we have time, I want to go into it really quickly with you on how it actually, going back into something fun that we were talking about Adam Weishaupt earlier, but going back into the idea of these libraries really quickly. You mentioned the Library of Alexandria. Well, it's almost karma with the Library of Alexandria, because we know with Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they marched into the holy city of Ephesus and stormed the Library of Celsius and helped themselves in the name of love, and the Library of Alexandria was built up from other places. I have no doubt that a lot of the knowledge came there from India. We know Pythagoras of Samos, who also had his little school burned to the ground. He was known in India as the Ionian master. And there's a very, very mystical and interesting reason that I'd love to tell you sometime of why he was known as the Ionian master and who Ion was. But getting into these various ideas about who were these ancient progenitors on this planet, this is something that actually Brian Forrester and I are exploring on our upcoming Serpentine Mysteries tour in Peru and Bolivia, and we're going into a lot of these ideas about these elongated skulls and these ancient progenitors that have been on this planet. And this is something that's very interesting to me, because I don't know how much time we have to go into this, but I'll try to say it really quickly.
We've got about 10 minutes before we hit our next break.
Okay, now this is a lot of fun, because we've had elongated skulls, rulers and mythology about this found all over the world. A lot of the stuff we found is due to cranial deformation. Obviously, a lot of the skeptics will point that out, and they'll say, okay, this is just artificial head binding. But actually, the skulls that have been found in Paracas were there was DNA testing done thanks to $100,000 that was brought together by L.A. Marzulli, who came to Brian Forrester. Brian Forrester's been working with this for years and petitioning the Peruvian government to allow samples to be taken. The really quick story version of this is that these skulls, which have been found in Paracas, they are 25% larger and 60% heavier than human skulls. They have a spine that would fit in a different place. There's different cranial changes and the size of the head. When you test their DNA, they belong to, when you look at the haplogroups, they belong to a group UTE1, which is a totally different variety than we'd see with the Inca. The Inca belongs to haplogroups A, B, C, D, and X. And this is totally different than what traditional academia would tell us about the Native Americans and whatnot, of where they came from, crossing the Bering Land Bridge, or the Bering Land Strait. So where these people came from, these elongated skull rulers that were essentially in Peru over there in Paracas, they had, when we look at their genetic profile, they would have lighter hair and lighter eyes, and they were believed to come from Crimea, the Scandinavian areas, the northern Black Sea, the Himalayan areas. So then we have a connection to our Vedas and our ancient sort of stories there, which is really fascinating. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So let me just jump in, because this is fascinating. So there's been detailed DNA analysis done on these skulls.
Yes.
You were stating that they have greater volume than a normal human skull. That's key. That's an absolutely key finding, because with the other deformed skulls, there's the practice of head binding, and they create the elongated skulls. Those skulls do not have any greater volume than any other human skull. Obviously, they wouldn't. You can't make a skull bigger just by changing the shape of it. But you're saying these skulls absolutely have a larger volume, and that there has been DNA testing done on them that indicates that they are from a different haplogroup, and they are not indigenous to South America, that they are basically from Central Asia and northern Europe.
Yes.
I just want to recap that.
Absolutely. And that's a very fascinating key finding, because
and
there's been other elongated skulls that we found in those areas, going towards the Himalayan areas, that there we find key similarities. Now,
what's the age of these skulls?
What's that?
What's the age of these skulls?
Now, that we're going to have to go back and check the data on the exact age, because they come from different periods. There's all sorts of different ages on the different areas that we'd be looking at, how far they go back. But we can safely assume thousands of years here. So what we got to look at, though, is when we see this evidence here, that we start to look at this pattern. Do you remember Thor Heyerdahl's work, the Kon-Tiki?
Yeah, he proved it was entirely possible to go in a very small boat across a major ocean and arrive in a new land back in the 60s.
He swore that what the Inca had said to the Spaniards was actually that they had inherited a lot of their structures and civilization from these gods, these gods that they describe very much like this. So we have this incredible story coming together about who were these ancient progenitors on this planet. Now, here's the part where it gets really freaky. Really quickly, these are the greatest stories we get of elongated skull rulers on this planet. We have, at the beginning of Egyptian mythology, we have not only Ptah, who is associated with the demiurges, but we have Osiris, an elongated skull giant ruler. Plutarch was famous for saying that the gods of ancient Egypt were the antediluvian or pre-cataclysmic kings who were deified or made into gods after death. So there we have this prototype for this ancient elongated skulled god that was there. Furthermore, we know from our ancient Babylonian or Chaldean lore, we have the story of Dagon, Nimrod, or Oannes. Some called him Sidon for his association with agriculture. He comes to the very primitive people, the Babylonian, ancient Babylonia, and starts teaching these primitive people, which I believe are coming back up from the cataclysmic areas, and seeding their society and teaching them about agriculture and law and how to live and whatnot. It's very much like our stories of Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan and these ideas that their people had. I mean, we know that when Cortez came to those particular shores, that their people were bowing before him, and they thought he was the return of their god, because there was an ancient god that came to them very much in this fashion and said, "Okay, here's your civilization. I'm going to give it to you."
Was this Viracocha? Was that the god that they believed he was?
Yes, Viracocha as well. When we look over in Peru.
Yes. Correct.
And Viracocha has another meaning, by the way. Brian's told me that in the translations at Viracocha, we also look at as the serpentine energy lines on the earth, the migration lines where all our temples are built along. So there's an ancient knowledge and understanding as well. Viracocha has more than one meaning. So what's interesting also through this is that we see in other mythology that for example, when we look at Egypt, people always want to talk about, they say, the gods of the kings in Egypt. And we don't use the word pharaoh, by the way. The word pharaoh, people use that, but it doesn't really mean king. It was only used during the Hyksos period. For a very small amount of time, the word pharaoh meant, someone associated with the high house. But it gets used all the time. People say the pharaonic this and that. But actually, the king that we associate with having an elongated skull, people always point to Akhenaten.
Yes.
So Akhenaten, who was Amenhotep IV, he portrayed himself and his whole family like Nefertiti. And you see this when you go to the Cairo Museum, when we go there, that he and his whole family have elongated skulls. But he's also portrayed as having this hermaphrodite body.
That's right.
Hermaphrodite comes from Hermes and Aphrodite. So his depiction that you see in the Cairo Museum is the universal man. It has all the features of all the people on Earth, including the elongated skull, which I believe was associated with a ruling class on Earth. So we know when we look at Akhenaten's actual depiction of his personal sculptor did a depiction of him. It's in the Berlin Museum. It looks nothing like the universal portrayal that he had with the elongated skull. And actually, when we see what his father looked like, Amenhotep III, or even Tutankhamun, his son, you know that actually they had all, very normal shaped skulls. So why were they trying to mimic this ruling class of gods on Earth? And here's the real trip I'm going to give you right now. This is the real trip that I think is fascinating, is that when you look at Paracas, Brian would tell me about a weird observation that he got. Brian said, Johnny, did you know that in Paracas we have this grove of date palms, or like not just groves, sorry, there's date palms there, but the Inca have no idea how to use date palms. No one has any clue on how to use the date palm today over there in Peru. It just sits there and just rots all the dates. And of course, it's more of a Middle Eastern thing, has all sorts of incredible benefits, right? Well, here's the interesting thing I want to give you really quickly. The date palm is associated with not only with beekeepers, because you can use the actual trunk as a beehive, and it's still used for that today. But when I was in the British Museum, I was talking to the anthropologists about the honeybee on the wall and why the gods are seen often with those bags, those man bags that we see from the Assyrians and the Akkadians and, all the groups we see. They're spreading pollen outside of that bag, and they're holding the date from the date palm, that they were the beekeepers or the spreaders of pollen. So it was fascinating to me when I started to look at the headdress of the Egyptian king looks like a honeybee, that we see that Adam Weishaupt, when he was originally naming the Illuminati, he didn't want to call it the Illuminati. He wanted to call it the beekeepers. When actually the keepers of the mysteries, even in Freemasonry, the honeybee and the beehive is very significant to them and is of their ideal importance and symbolism. We find that the bee was associated with the great Christian king Charlemagne. The actual fleur de lis that we see in France and Quebec, it's actually the symbolism of the bee. These were the ancient pollinators of not only bringing the pollen back after the cataclysmic destruction on Earth, but seeding the mysteries and everything. And their symbolism is absolutely ubiquitous. It's amazing. And this is the sort of stuff that blows my mind.
So pollen as a symbol of a broader pollination of humanity. This is what you're saying.
Yes.
Wow.
Richard, when you go back into even into the Assyrians, and you go back into the Egyptian kings, the first dynastic kings were all called the beekeepers. This was the ultimate initiation into the mysteries of both actually physical interpretation, spiritually, and education-wise, everything. This is associated, that there's been an underlying hand that has been there. So that's what I get very excited about. And I'm also excited about the fact that the winged gods in the Assyrian reliefs, who I believe potentially imply that these beings had the ability to come and go, perhaps as extraterrestrials, they are associated in this pollination process. So it tells me there might be a cosmic seed in all of this.
I just love this. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we have to take a break. But I just want to say, when you do this book, you realize you're going to get a lot of pushback from the academic community. I want to talk about that when we come back. But I think if you footnote this well, if you document what you do, you're going to be in a good ground. The academics, look, they're just guarding their turf. They don't necessarily know anything more than the next people. We tend to really put them up on a pedestal, and it's good that we have them, but they have their own limitations as well. Anyway, look, bottom of the hour. Let's take a quick break. I'm Richard Dolan here with Jonny Enoch. We're going to have more with you.
I want you to meet the owner of Life Changing Tea, Ronnie McMullen, because this will change your life. It's so good for you. And I love the fact that Ronnie McMullen is a former talk show host who knows talk radio. This is a guy who knows great health and came up with this amazing product called Get the Tea. I'm going to tell you all about it. Ronnie, welcome to the Mike Gallagher Show. How are you?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Mike?
I'm great. I got to hear how you went from talk radio to the CEO of Get the Tea.
It's a weird story. I'll make it quick. I got sick. And so as soon as I got sick, I looked for natural remedies, and next thing you know, I was in there getting stuff together and putting things together, learning about what makes you better, what doesn't, and the rest is history. That was 11, 12 years ago. People are they're waking up. They're saying, you know what, we don't want the GMOs anymore. We don't want the garbage pesticides, herbicides, so we want to get cleansed, and that's exactly what Life Change Tea does.
To order, go to getthetea.com. Not available in stores. Go to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com.
Hi, it's AJ from Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. Have you been searching for unique items to create or add to your sacred space? What about tools for your holistic healing? Or those one-of-a-kind magical ingredients to manifest your desires? Well, look no more, because Vibes has a variety of items to assist you in your spiritual journey. From crystals to candles, incense to books, tapestries to jewelry, OnlineVibes.com has what you're seeking. We even have some thoughtful and mindful gifts to share with your friends and family too. Visit us at OnlineVibes.com from the comfort of your home, or give us a call at 385-244-1099 to have your order beautifully packaged and sent directly to you or a loved one. And right now, take advantage of the coupon code KGRA at checkout to receive 15% off any order. Remember, online, VIBEC.com.
Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
We're back. I'm Richard Dolan. Hey, before we continue, I just want to remind people again, if they are interested in following what I do, I have this weekly show on KGRA, that's for sure. It's the Richard Dolan Show. I've been doing it for over 6 years. But I also have a members site. It is called richarddolanmembers.com, as well as richarddolanpress.com. I've got two websites. I keep them going. Richard Dolan Press has books that I publish by myself and by other very interesting authors. They are fascinating, and I'm proud to have them in there. Go check out richarddolanpress.com when you have the opportunity. As far as the members site, Richard Dolan Members is where I'm putting a lot of effort in these days. I couldn't do it without my wife, Tracy. She manages that with me, and we are working on it every day to make it as great an experience as possible. So by all means, if you're interested in what I'm doing, go to richarddolanmembers.com. On YouTube, I've got my Richard Dolan YouTube channel, and that's got new content going up all the time, every week, including my show Intelligent Disclosure, which is live stream video. Been doing that a couple of episodes, and it's fun and it's interesting, and I think people like it. So by all means, go to my YouTube site. Johnny, welcome back. And why don't we tell people where they can find you again?
Sure. My website is www.metaphysicalsource.com. I have a YouTube channel full of videos about all my travel adventures and where I go, and that's youtube.com/metaphysicalsource.
Great. Metaphysical Source is how people can find Jonny Enoch. And I just have to say, I'm going to guess that listeners are really enjoying this conversation, because you've got a really good way of getting into these kind of esoteric, out of the ordinary types of concepts and issues and so forth. But you've got a way of bringing them to people in an interesting, engaging way, and I just hope you keep doing that. And I will really love to look forward to when your book comes out.
I can't wait to get that book over to you, because you did say that when I saw you last night, you might give me a little blurb on it, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I have a feeling that'll happen. I mean, I'm enjoying talking with you, so I have a feeling I'll like the book. So I think that's probably a given. Tracy's coming up to me now with a note, and why don't you just tell me what you want? So, oh, yes, Serpentine. Trace, what?
Johnny's doing a Serpentine tour. Why don't you ask him about that?
That's Tracy, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
She wanted me to mention that you're doing a Serpentine tour. Why don't you just chat about that?
Yeah, so I'm doing a couple tours coming up. We are doing the Ancient Mystery Tour of Egypt with my friend and Egyptologist Mohammed Ibrahim, and we're going to be looking at the Serpentine mysteries there as well. We have a lot of exclusive permissions to go inside of the temples and head out into the Great Pyramid at night. And trust me, there's all sorts of mystical and incredible things that happen in that Great Pyramid. Almost everybody that steps inside of that timeless serpent in the stone, that magnificent edifice, goes through a transformative experience. But I'm then also going to be heading with Brian Forrester. We're heading out into Peru, to Bolivia and Punapunku. We're doing an extension to Easter Island, and we are going to go deep into the Serpentine mysteries of Viracocha and look at the elongated skulls, and we're going to show you some things that will blow your mind. So please come with us.
Fascinating. And is this something people can find on your website at?
Absolutely. Find it on my website, but most certainly go to hiddenincatours.com. That's for Brian Forrester's website. We already have it listed up there. And if you want to sign up for the Egypt tour, we do have ancientmysterytours.com, but the fastest way is to go on Guide of Egypt on Facebook and message Mohammed Ibrahim, and you can get in with our tour. And you don't want to miss that one. If you've never been to Egypt, it will change your life.
Hey, can I ask you about the Great Pyramid? Do you mind if we just chat about this a little bit?
Please.
The reason is I have been fascinated by the Great Pyramid for as long as I can remember. And I've done a little bit of reading about it. I'm not expert, but I've done some reading about it. And I am well aware of what seems to me, honestly, is the impossibility of that structure. I mean, it shouldn't exist. It's so perfect. It's so amazing. And yet it does exist. Like when people start getting into start with the engineering. That's maybe one of the simplest things. You're talking about millions of blocks of stone supposedly laid down in like 20 years' time. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I don't understand how that could have been possible. Each of those blocks is a couple of tons, laid perfectly from the ground level right up to the top, like no mistakes. This is like a construction manager's worst nightmare, is building that thing at a slope of 51 degrees. Incline. That's a heck of a slope. And on top of that, the original casing was polished limestone, which came down and partially built the city of Cairo, from what I understand, after it came down in an earthquake thousands of years later. The fact that it is facing the cardinal points with, virtual perfect exactitude, north, south, east, west, and such a massive amount of mass that's there. And just so many other things. The fact that it expresses pi, that it expresses the golden section, phi, that it expresses, a great deal of esoteric. How? The Egyptians in 2450 BC were supposed to be at a very rudimentary level. In their standard mythology, these were people who believed that the earth was like a disc, like a coin, where when the god Ra went down below the disc, he was fighting the demons of the underworld, and you'd better hope he won, because if he lost, the world would end. But yet that structure seems to be situated geographically on the earth in a way that the builders seem to know that the earth was a sphere. So there's just all of these bizarre anomalies. And so that's just me talking about the Great Pyramid. I'd like to know what you have to say about the Great Pyramid.
Well, everything that you said about the Great Pyramid is absolutely true. It's estimated that there's about 2.3 million blocks of stone there, and you have each stone that weighs something like 2.5 tons. When you're actually going up to the pyramid, if you want to climb up it, you need someone to actually physically help you up each block. That's how large they are. And one thing that you pointed out, which is really great for people to see in their minds and to visualize, is that we get a story that actually goes back from the Arabian Nights. That is a really interesting story that goes back to. Have you ever heard the story about the Caliph Al-Mamun? When he was looking at the pyramid, he sent his loyal and faithful servants to the pyramid because he believed that there was a treasure that was hidden underneath.
He's the one who broke into the pyramid.
Right, but the interesting thing about this story, which I've looked at this idea so many times, is that we have these legends of giants being in Egypt also. That the story is that there was giants that built the pyramids, and it was the giants that put the treasure under the pyramid, and that they had hid it there in the subterranean chambers with monsters that were supposed to protect it and all that sort of good stuff. But it's said in the story, which is very doubtful, that when the servants of the caliph came there, that the outside of the pyramid was so shiny that you couldn't see anything, that it was like blinding from the light, that it was perfect with all the casing stones in place, which is very, very doubtful that that was the case. It's more likely that there was an entrance there in Greco-Roman times, that they knew about that somewhere where they knew the exact perfect place to break in and get into the pyramid. What's interesting that a lot of people don't conceptualize about this is that the entire Giza plateau has been artificially leveled, and underneath it you have these Osirian shafts that have been cut into it. This is a very sophisticated design, and Chris Dunn has meticulously put together his working hypotheses of the Giza power plant idea, that the Great Pyramid is built like a Faraday cage with the layers of stone that you have with granite and sandstone and limestone and everything else, that there's an energy conducting principle. And when anybody that visits the Great Pyramid and you go inside, you know that the whole idea of it being a tomb for Khafre or Khufu is nonsense. The way that the chambers are constructed, how it's put together. There's these portals that are put into the ground, like they're these circular portals around the outside of the pyramid, that it's as if they were to gather up water, and that the water would go into these underground channels. And it's a complex sort of design, is like this electromagnetic energy conducting idea that perhaps there's different ideas with it. I mean, a lot of people feel a very powerful energy when you step into this place. And of course, one thing you and I were discussing is that there is a famous story that Stephen Mailer and I, in fact, have discussed many times before, about the time that Napoleon visited Egypt. Because, of course, when he went there something like 1798, we know that he was somewhat of a usurper, but he did a lot of good, bringing different researchers and artists and things like that to Egypt and looking at all the antiquities, which we find over at the Louvre. But with him, he had this intense out-of-body experience when he went there. He entered the Great Pyramid. The story is that he came out as pale and as white as a ghost because he saw his Waterloo. And many people have described these otherworldly kind of experiences. I think the pyramids were very much like a technology, Richard. And we have pyramids on both sides of the Atlantic. And we know that, again, we were talking about in the Yucatan by Chichen Itza, we have where we look at Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan. We have pyramids. Even when we go up the pyramid culture in Guatemala and Tikal, all over the place, even 10 miles north of Bimini, over in the Bahamas. For many years, we've heard these whispers, even coming back from naval intelligence, about an alleged large crystal pyramid under the water. We know one of the largest pyramids in the world is in China, where they found Caucasoid mummies nearby there. Perhaps one of the reasons we don't have pyramids all over Europe is due to the fact that Europe was under ice during the last ice age. So, the development of these things is a little different. But we know there's pyramids all over the world. They serve a great, incredible purpose, especially where they're placed.
I'd like to learn more about those Chinese pyramids. I tried looking into that myself, and I have to say I wasn't entirely convinced that was a legitimate phenomenon, but I'm open to looking at the evidence as it comes to me.
Yes,
so
well, I mean, you're sort of limited on what research that can be done there as well. Right. But, the idea that what we have, too, with obelisks are rather fascinating, because when you're in a place like, if you go over to Karnak, which was also, you look over at Thebes also, the city of gates, you find like these large obelisks made of granite that are absolutely magnificent. You find one on your side and you go up to it and you bang the side of the obelisk with your hand. And if you go up to it and put your ear up to it, you'll see it resonates this sound, like this vibratory energy.
My goodness,
this
that's
vibratory
amazing.
energy. And one thing I've done is I've done a lot of videos and research going into various cities that I believe have esoteric symbolism and connections to these things. I've gone to London and Paris and all these sort of places, and various European cities, looking at the architectonics, which I love studying architectonics. And one of the things that you see there is that I believe that Big Ben in London is shaped after an obelisk. Of course, there is a very famous obelisk right there in Westminster known as Cleopatra's Needle, which actually came from the city of Un or On,
That's right.
or Heliopolis. Just like the one in New York, just like the one in Paris. But in Paris, we have an obelisk there that's right in plain sight. You have the large obelisk that's formed there with the Eiffel Tower, which is in the shape of an obelisk, in my opinion, right next to right nearby the Seine River. And the interesting thing about these is I believe they act as acupuncture needles on the planet. And there's an ancient knowledge of geomagnetic energy that goes throughout our planet that has been wielded and moved around for a very long time.
I love that idea, and that's just fascinating to me. May I ask you about the other pyramids on the Giza Plateau before we move on to whatever else we're going to do? I feel like a kid right now, just asking questions because I've got you right here. I'm actually enjoying the fact that I'm not super familiar with your work beforehand, because this gives me the opportunity just to jump in with all my enthusiasm. I want to ask you about the other two pyramids in the Giza Plateau. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because when one hears about the Egyptian pyramids, we always hear about the Great Pyramid. And indeed, that Great Pyramid, the largest of them, is unbelievable. And it's been studied, it's been measured. The measurements are incredible. We know that it's got the interior chambers in there and all of that. And, you know, the thing is, like, I don't know almost anything about the other two pyramids on that complex. I mean, they're all impressive. Even the small one is impressive. So I guess I'm wondering, has there been any work done on the mathematics, on the engineering, on the difficulty, on any other elements of these pyramids? I mean, I know that they're in the shape of the Belt of Orion, like they're positioned to mirror Orion's belt in the sky. But that's about all that I know, and I really wondered if you have any information on those other two pyramids, and are they as anomalous in their construction as the Great Pyramid?
Well, okay, so you have the main pyramids, which are Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, Menkaure, that are there over at the Giza Plateau. And there's pyramids sort of scattered all over the place. But what you have to really keep in mind that, again, when I look at the pyramid as a technology, that it's not only its geometrical shape, that it has a universal property that sort of draws in energy. And there's been certain French studies that have been looked at, and I'm sure you've heard of these over the years, where people have taken pyramids and they've kept razor blades sharper and fruit fresher, and they've said, okay, maybe there's a universal property to geometry. Most certainly Euclid's geometry, and the Pythagoreans sort of explored these sort of ideas before as well. But the idea that we get with ancient Egypt, Richard, that people really have to appreciate, and they have to appreciate it with the pyramid and these ancient structures that we're looking at. And I really believe they have to do just as Stephen Mailer talks about all the time, is that they have to look at it like an onion. So today we have the Islamic layer. We pull back that layer. Then you go back and you'll have a Coptic Christian layer. There's even a Jewish layer. You go back into a Roman layer, a Greek layer, a Persian layer. And as we keep going back, we discover that everybody that came along into Egypt wanted to become Egyptians. They wanted to take this great and mighty civilization, the mother of civilization, that had this incredible seed that they gave us. But when you go back far enough, we find that we have a pre-dynastic civilization. And this is the real trip. This is the crazy stuff. Because when you go back far enough, we find that everything is the most perfectly cut stuff. You were talking about how the Great Pyramid blows your mind, how it's been built.
Yeah.
And the others are sort of like that. I mean, the Great Pyramid is magnificent, more magnificent in its standings. But there's certain pyramids along the way that you kind of get the impression that, later dynastic Egyptians and people came along that were, looking at how the others were built and said, okay, we're going to, try to do something on a smaller scale, or came along to try to replicate it.
Can I just jump in? I just want to ask, because this is why I want to say this. Because when I look at the Great Pyramid, I cannot figure out, I just cannot see this as a possible construction by Egyptian civilization of that time. I just can't. I don't know who did it, but I don't think that they did it. That's my opinion. However,
it wasn't, and I don't believe it was at all.
So what about the other two pyramids? Are they as difficult an engineering feat in your opinion, or are they as esoterically interesting as the Great Pyramid, I guess is what I want.
I believe that they're esoterically as interesting. And to be honest with you, that's something that Muhammad and I we're going to be even exploring even further this time around. And that's something that actually I know that he's going into further, as well as actually looking at the various building techniques and how these have been put together. Because like when you start to see these, what you have to look at is that what did the dynastic Egyptians that came along that found Egypt in later waves of migration coming from the west, as we've been told that I think it was Diodorus of Sicily that started talking about the various Egyptians that came and discovered Egypt and just took it on as their own civilization, picked up from where things last left. For example, with the dynastic Egyptians, when you go back, when the pre-dynastic Egyptians, we go back into the most ancient, most perfectly cut stuff in granite. Like we're talking the inside of the Great Pyramid. There are no hieroglyphics, Richard. Yeah. None whatsoever. Go to the Assyrian over at the back of Abydos by the Temple of Seti I. That stuff is insane, and it's so flawless and so perfect. I mean, there's no hieroglyphics, nothing to say, hey, we were here, we did this, even in the Serapeum.
And when you're cutting through granite, that's like the hardest of the stones. You need, my understanding is, cutting tools, the cutting tools to cut through granite with a perfection that they've got, you would need at least bronze, I would think. And I don't think they had bronze.
The evidence is there to see that you can see there's evidence for advanced machining. I have some videos up on my YouTube channel on our last trip there, where Brian was clearly showing where some of the blocks you could see where there was almost like a blade that went through where they made a mistake on one block and they discarded the whole thing. So there's some very, very precise cuts and very interesting things that we see there. And one of the other interesting ideas that was put forth by Stephen Mailer's great teacher, Abdel Hakim Ayawan, the late great Abdel Hakim Ayawan, he had shown these things that are commonly known as the schist disc. And I know that this has been talked about by acoustic engineer Tom Danley about, certain sound waves that coalesce and how you could create anti-gravitational fields. But he sort of hypothesized that there were these discs that were spun underneath a bowl that could create an anti-gravitational wave that could lift up, when they're combined in large amounts, could lift up these blocks and they become weightless, and you just push them with your finger or your pinky finger and push them into place. So there's some kind of advanced technology that whoever was there was working with that we've lost touch with, and I believe the pre-dynastics understood that, and really quickly we see that when we go over to what's known as the Valley of the Kings or the Valley of the Nobles. There's no way that those were originally tombs. Those are the later dynastic priestcraft that started the death cult, that everybody had to have these elaborate tombs, that wanted this big money-making scheme, which, hey, maybe some of our religions have cashed in on that today. But these were clearly water shafts or something that were cut so precisely, and they're absolutely amazing. They blow your mind when you go down into them. I don't think those dynastic Egyptians cut those at all.
Absolutely fascinating. We were almost out of time. I can't believe this happened. We had like 5 minutes to go, and you were so kind in allowing me just to lead us onto the pyramids, because I'm so personally fascinated by that, and you just have a wealth of knowledge. I remember years ago, before I got into the UFO subject, I ran into a guy who was really into the pyramids, and he said, "Yeah, they didn't lift those blocks normally. They used acoustic technology, sound waves." And I remember thinking, I was in my mid-20s. I knew nothing about this. I just thought, you're crazy. That was my thought. Like, you're crazy. I listen to this now and I think something had to be employed to get those blocks in position, because it's just impossible. But look, so all of this is evidence in a way. I mean, this is, and so many of the other things you've talked about, of a kind of blueprint. And we can get back to that just to wrap this up, by other intelligence, I guess, that has been here all along.
I would say so. I mean, we've had these other intelligent civilizations here for a long time. How many minutes do we have left?
We've got about 4 minutes.
Okay.
Why don't you just run with it?
It's interesting. You go back into that time period at the beginning of the Christian era. or the beginning of the Common Era, or just before that, there was a type of mystical Buddhism that might be referred to as Mahayana Buddhism that was around in India. And of course, then with the spread of Hinduism that started to come out, a lot of these ideas, these concepts of using sound for levitation and esoteric meditation techniques, and a lot of the cosmology in our universe, I believe existed in Buddhism at those times, and it was held by the Arhats. And because Hinduism was spreading at that particular time, and it was, more prolific at that area in India, that religion and those temples were being chased out of those parts. And so the different concepts and ideas that would have been held by the Bodhisattvas and all the mystical secrets and teachings of Buddha, I believe would have been very, very fascinating and very much like what we're talking about. And so what I think happened with that is that these things got chased out into the Himalayan areas, up into Tibet, and that's where a lot of the secrets got put away by the Arhats. And there has been certain engineers and doctors that have gone up there and talked about the fact that they had ideas of how to use instruments to levitate stones and all kinds of secrets from the ancient world, which were up there. And I think this is very fascinating that we would have this lost story. And we know that Buddhism has spread in different parts, where the more conservative versions are in China. Or if you look over where it's gone to Myanmar or Burma, the archipelago regions, much different than in Korea or Sri Lanka. So, there's so much we've lost touch with, Richard. There's so many of these ancient blueprints, but we're going to uncover them one puzzle piece at a time together.
I love that. And, the thing is, when, again, I think of the academic community and how there's definitely always going to be pushback from them, and they're going to say, what's your data, what's your sources, and so forth. But the thing is, what we know about the academic world is that there are great scholars there, but it's a culture that unfortunately creates its own little bubble, it seems to me. And if you're not in that little community, they don't really want to know much about what you have to say. And if you're not part of the university community, they absolutely don't really take you seriously. And it's harmful, because they're missing out on tremendous scholarship and research that's going on. I mean, when we think about how much hidden knowledge there was in our civilization a mere 100, 150 years ago, I mean, there were entire ancient civilizations that were unknown to people a little over a century ago. The Hittites, I remembered reading, one of the major empires in the Middle East, were an unknown factor until they were discovered archaeologically a little over a century ago. And just so much more. We're just discovering massive amounts, and we're doing it now. I think when people look back on this period of time, I have a feeling they will argue that this was an archaeological revolution in our own understanding of what's going on in our ancient origins. I actually believe that. I mean, there's just so much going on, and it's researchers like yourself and others who are uncovering the opening up and filling in a lot of the gaps of our ancient history. And, ultimately, I think we're getting into what is our own identity as a species, as a civilization. And by finding some of these ancient clues, I think you're helping take us down the path to answering some of those questions.
Well, thank you very much, and so are you. I mean, this work is never ending. It's like that rabbit hole. The deeper we go, the weirder it gets sometimes.
Absolutely. So look, we're at the end. I want people to know, if they want to find you, they go to metaphysicalsource.com. Is that right?
Yes, and
good.
My YouTube channel, Metaphysical Source, as well.
And just type in Jonny Enoch, Johnny without the H, Jonny, Enoch, Enoch. That's how it is. I think you're probably an easy Google search. So, Johnny, that's all we have the time for. I want to thank everyone who's been listening here. While we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. And for those of you who are members of the Richard Dolan member site, look for the follow-up chat that I have with Johnny. We'll have quite a bit more to say. Good night.